Hello everybody and welcome to Ellison Legal's In Case You Missed It. So this month we will be going over October's posts, but as usual, just a quick disclosure. Ellison Legal has limited liability under a scheme approved by the Professional Standards legislation, and this video is not intended to give you with legal advice, so please, if you do need that legal advice, please go see your legal practitioner so you can get some information that is tailored to your specific situation. So that's out of the way. It is now November, so let's go over October's Facebook posts. So just having a look here, our first post was having young children in your will. So when you have a minor, there are a number of considerations that you need to go through. And quite often I find when I'm taking instructions from people, there are certain things that they haven't thought about. So if you do have minors that you are including in your will, your children, there are a few things to think about. So one of those things, which often is not included in wills, is what happens to the child who is going to be their new legal carer. So have a think about that one. The other things to think about with minors is how is it that they're going to be able to get their inheritance, basically. It's not really the legal term, but how they're going to be able to access funds for, say, education or just their health and lifestyle. So those are things to consider. Do trusts need to be, well, trusts will be set up when they are a minor, but how is it that you want that structured? So when you have a minor, there are those things to think about. So the next post in October was your children who are no longer residents, or it's not even just your children, but when you're nominating someone who is not an Australian resident. So that can actually have quite a large impact on your estate. And one of the biggest thing is the tax consequences. So that's something else to consider when preparing your will. What was the third consideration? Let's have a look. Oh, the gifts that you've given early. So have you included that into your will? So you said to someone something like they're going to get this house, and then you've transferred the house early, but your will still says that you give the house and then you give it to someone else. Oops, big boo-boo there. So you need to consider what is in your will. What have you put in your will that you said you're going to give someone? Have you done that early? There's also another consideration is monetary gifts. So if, say, you have you and your spouse and you say, I'm going to give person X $100,000, and your spouse also says, I'm going to give person X $100,000, there are certain situations if, say, the two spouses die within 30 days of each other, does it happen that one spouse gives that $100,000, the other spouse gives $100,000, but together they actually wanted to give the person $100,000 once? So we need to put in there what we call a hodgepodge clause, and say if it happens within a certain time frame, then it's basically halved. So that's another consideration. The fourth one, because in October we did have 5 Fridays, so we've got 5 posts. The fourth one is blended families. So this one can get quite tricky when you've got a blended family. You've got your children from a previous relationship, you have a new spouse. How is that going? How's the estate going to be split up in that case? So that's something that you really need to sit down and consider. How are the assets within your estate going to be split up, distributed? Who's going to get what? How do you want things to happen? And what can happen? So that's another consideration. And the last post for October was superannuation and joint assets. So these are assets that are not estate assets, or not at first go there estate assets. So superannuation, for example, is, we all know, it's the money that you put aside for your retirement later on, or currently, whatever your situation is. But that's held in a super fund, which is a trust. The entity holding those funds for you as beneficiary, so you're going to need to refer to previous posts that I've put out about this, but the person holding that for you is the trustee. They are entrusted to hold those assets for you. You do not hold those assets. So in other words, that means you don't own it. If you don't own it, it doesn't fall into your estate. Now, there are ways to get your super into the estate, but that's a consideration. Do you actually want it to fall into your estate, or do you want your beneficiaries to benefit to obtain your super after your death directly from super? So there's a few things to consider there, and joint assets as well. When something is held together, so there's another post about joint assets. When something's held together, it's held as a whole. So when you're a joint tenant, say, of a house, you own it as a whole together. So if one person passes away, the other person takes over. If you hold it as tenants in common, you hold different shares, and whatever share you have does fall in your estate. Joint assets, take over, does not fall into your estate. So that's another consideration. So just to recap, I just have to flick back down again. So the 5 things we focused on as will considerations are: do you have children to consider in your will? Do you have any foreign beneficiaries to consider, and the tax implications of that? Gifts that you've given early, or monetary gifts that you and your spouse want to give together to someone. Blended families. And the 5th one was assets that do not form part of your estate. So those are my 5 main things to consider when having your will prepared for you. And that I often come across when preparing wills for my clients, these are things that they've just not thought about. So whoever said wills were easy. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I will see you next month in December, going over this month's posts of November. Thanks for listening. Bye.